Welcome to the I Am HVAC Growth Podcast, where we interview the top leaders in the HVAC industry across North America to understand how they grew their businesses to where they are today. I'm your host, Rob Murray, co-founder and CEO of Intree, a digital marketing agency focused on helping HVAC companies grow. All right, we got another episode of the I Am HVAC Growth Podcast. Thanks for joining us today. I have the pleasure of having Karen Crnkovich with us today. Thanks so much for being on the show, Karen.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. Karen's the owner of and chief handshaker of DMC Service out of Kansas. So just for the audience, can you just give us a quick rundown of like how you got into the industry and ended up as the chief handshaker of DMC? And then also just give us a quick rundown. What's the core focus of the HVAC company?
Sure. So first of all, chief handshaker, I made it up because when I became president, I just felt like president was a little, I wasn't ready to take that name. So I thought, well, what's clever and catchy and will make people remember me? So that's where the chief handshaker is born from. And it does make people remember me pretty much all the time.
Well, it's also accurate.
It is. It's really accurate, especially with how I started. So I started my career in sales, corporate sales, hospitality sales, and married a guy who had started DMC Service 16 years ago. And he was one man, a truck in his dream of working for himself. And our company grew. At the time, it was his company. And when I moved to Kansas City, I really kind of started to feel pretty discontent with my personal career, and DMC was on a growth trajectory and needed some help in the back end side of things, the office, payables, all of the book work. And so I started doing that 10 years ago. I took an online QuickBooks class and gave myself a crash course on how to be a CEO or bookkeeper of a company. And
Awesome.
as a salesperson, I love numbers. So even though it's a little odd, like sales and numbers usually don't match up, it's just a part of kind of how I'm wired. And so then in 2012, I went full-time with DMC, and we decided that I needed a little street cred with the technicians who worked with us. So I started going to night classes to become licensed. And over the course of 2.5 years, I earned my master mechanical license, my master plumbing license. And then at that point, I had been through enough torture. I decided to go ahead and get a master electrician license as well.
Why not?
So yeah, that made me the first, and I think I'm still the only master mechanical license holder that's a woman in my county, possibly my state.
Awesome.
And at that point, I bought in 50% of the company. And so I became the 51% owner and started doing more than book work. I started helping out handshaking and networking to grow the business. I'm going to take a quick sip. That's okay?
Yeah, no, it's all good. It's all good. I mean, I think the next part of the story is really where the life of this interview is going to come into play. So maybe before we jump into that, I could just ask you a couple quick ones.
Sure.
So first of all, sales technician, so operations and back office, you essentially understand every aspect of the business at that point.
Pretty much, yeah.
And it's not a lot of people that have that kind of perspective.
No, I think it's not unusual though in a small business. When I joined DMC, we had 3 employees.
Yeah,
and
okay.
One of them wasn't paid. Me.
Right.
So, I think when you start a business and you become an entrepreneur like my ex-husband did, you have to do everything and wear all the hats. And as the business grew, and especially in the trades, when you're out, we call it turning the screwdrivers, doing all of the things, it's the back office, the billing, the sales, the marketing, anything HR related that really falls to the side. Yeah. And people don't pay attention to it, which is a lot of reasons why, small businesses don't make it past 2 years, because you can't physically do it all for an extended period of time.
Sure. Yeah, you burn out. And if you leave something for too long, it ends up coming back to bite you. So right. quick one before we get into the meat and potatoes. What's your philosophy on this lifelong learning? Like, you're just like, you know what, I'm going to take an online course and figure out how to be a bookkeeper. You know what, I'm going to become a master tech in everything. Like what's your whole belief on that?
I wish I could say that there was some like magic advice I can give your listeners. There's really not. I'm pretty scrappy, and I have a very voracious like appetite to learn. And I think that and I'm pretty upbeat and positive. And I think that my positive attitude and my scrappy, I'll figure it out, and my love of learning kind of makes the perfect triangle of I won't, like I have on my board here, failure is not an option. Failure is not an option. I'm going to figure it out. And I think anyone who owns their own business, it's essential that if they don't have that trait or those traits, that they build them. And I'm a big believer that you can build any trait that you want, you just have to practice.
That's cool. Yeah, it's like it's not just your muscles that you can train, right? Like, I mean, and we all know that we can get smarter, but then even just focusing that on different like kind of core competencies, I think it's brilliant. So anyway, thanks for that. And I also love that idea of that triangle of love for learning, scrappiness, and positive attitude. There might be a model there worth writing a book at some point if you ever get around to it. I just think that's a really cool way to look at things.
Maybe I will. I'm always looking for ideas. I want to be a writer. Someday that's like my plan X, because plan B's and through K are already done. Like I've already exhausted those. So, but yeah, I really do love to write. Oh my gosh. Sorry. That was my app on my phone telling me to drink water.
I was like, did you just spill something everywhere? No, it's
I know.
okay.
I am so sorry. I thought I had like made everything quiet. And here is, why, these kind of things are so interesting and funny, because okay. Now we're
back. It's all good. No worries. All right. So then you take over half the business. You start being a bit more of the, chief handshaker. And then
what happens, which I alluded to, there was some foreshadowing in this story, that, it's oftentimes that entrepreneurs just burn out. They take everything. So like when it's your baby, it's hard to let go. It's hard to delegate, especially if you're really, really good at what you do. My ex-husband is a brilliant HVAC technician. He hit a wall. He hit the wall going like 150 miles an hour. It wasn't like 70 miles an hour. I mean, he hit it hard, and he was just like, I can't run this business anymore. I'm not sure that I really want to be married. And so there was a lot of kind of heartbreak that is a part of this story. But at that point, I had invested a lot of energy into DMC, and I saw the potential for where it could go, and how a company in the trade, I mean, let's face it, the trades don't have the best like reputations. Maybe no dig against used car salesmen, but we like to make fun of them and say that they're, we're maybe one step above.
Right.
Maybe.
Maybe it's questionable.
It is questionable. And so I saw the opportunity to take what he had started and really kind of shift it to be something that, from a marketing and a core culture standpoint, could be really different than all the trades that I'm aware of. And so I bought him out, is the short story of that. I bought him the remaining 49 shares of stock that we shared. I leveraged basically everything that I had and bet on myself. And that was 5 years ago. And there's been a lot of learning lessons in that 5 years. The biggest one is that because I'm scrappy and kind of have a positive attitude, I've learned the hard way that being a little pragmatic is probably not necessarily a bad idea, because we said yes to some really big projects that we just were not prepared for as an organization, and they nearly bankrupted us.
Yeah. So, I mean, in a time of crisis, and, whether we're in that now or not is maybe debatable depending on who you talk to, but, it's a weird time right now, and, cash flow and payroll and revenue and confidence in the marketplace is different than it has been. We've kind of had the winds at our back for the last 10 years, and now we're kind of, sailing against it. So, it's seeming like the story about what you've gone through is really relevant. So maybe you can just share some insight in terms of what these big jobs did and how it impacted the business and you personally, and then what you did to get through it on the other side where you are today.
Yeah, sure. So it was about early 2017, mid 2017, that we decided to go after bigger projects. Now, let's back up a bit. DMC Service is a commercial and a little bit residential, but mostly commercial service company. So we fix it, we maintain it, we replace things. We don't do big construction jobs. And yet, construction was hot. Everybody's building and there's so much money you can make. And so we started going after bigger projects, and the biggest project, to give it some kind of scale, and everything, I always say, everything's big to somebody. Like if you're a $200,000 company, then $1 million sounds really great. If you're a $20 million company, $1 million sounds not so great. And we were hovering at that kind of $1 million mark. And our biggest project to date, before we took these two, was like $250,000. Like really, service companies, we work for our money. It's $100 here, $100 there. $25,000 is a good size project. And so we went after a couple of jobs. One of them, the bid was $300,000. The other one was $425,000. And I kind of thought at the time, it gave me a little like pause, but I was like, we won't get them both. Like if we get one, then that's great. Well, we won both.
What do you do?
It was nuts.
Holy cow.
It was nuts because, within 2 jobs, we had almost doubled our revenue overnight. And what I learned, the really critical lesson I learned, was that my awesome technicians are not installers. And it sounds like, to me today, it sounds so like duh, when it like the head smack emoji girl, but I didn't really understand that. I really, truly did not understand it. And that's where the positive attitude and the scrappiness can really be a downfall. It's like my biggest blessing and it's my biggest curse, because I was like, well, we'll figure it out. But I had to get a team of people to figure it out. And the first job we completed, and the thing I will say is the work we did is beautiful. It looks amazing. It is installed, the best install probably that's ever happened, because it was being installed by service guys, and it's a different mindset, not good or bad, it's just different. And so the first job we broke even. Like we didn't make money, but we just barely broke even. The second job is really where we got in trouble. It was the perfect storm, quagmire of things that happened. But the $300,000 job, we ended up at the end losing $100,000 on it.
Oh.
And that was painful. That kind of helps. And so about midway through that, I started to recognize, like, cash is king, and I started to recognize that we were starting to struggle. And so it was the end of 2018, we finished the year the highest ever, almost $2 million in revenue, sales, and we lost like $25,000 on our P&L. But I could see going forward how there was a really big train wreck that was starting to happen. And so we get into 2017 was the highest year. We get into 2018 and I started scrambling. Like 75% of my time is spent dispatching guys, talking to customers, kind of managing the books, making sure that we're getting things invoiced and back, and then all the other things. But 75% of my time turned into being a voracious bill collector and the stingiest boss who ever probably walked the face of the earth. Like I went through the P&L, I went through every single line item. If it was like the slash and burn budget, I cut out all of the, like, and I hate to say this because I do think networking organizations are really important. All of them gone. Like those are nice to have, not need to have. I looked at health insurance. We cut our health insurance costs by 40%. We like literally no stone was unturned. I was recycling folders, like the manila folders. Usually I recycle them and use them twice. We were using them like 3 or 4 times. And it was survival mode. And then I started personally borrowing money everywhere I could find.
Okay. So on that, well, there's a couple ideas in terms of survival mode. If somebody was in a position, or if you had to do it again, not to say you'll ever do that, because obviously you're scrappy, positive attitude, and you know what you're doing because you've learned so much doing it. But what would be the first step or first two steps you'd recommend someone does in order to, make sure they'll weather the storm?
So the first thing is having some place where you have ready cash. Now, I don't necessarily mean sitting on cash underneath your mattress. What I mean is I've always, being fiscally conservative personally paid off for me to be a successful business owner. Because, for instance, when I refied my house during our separation, and I had to put everything in my name, I had some equity. So I tapped into the equity through a home equity line of credit and then just let it sit there. So I didn't go and finish my basement or put in a pool. I just had money there that was liquid. If I needed it, I could grab it. And that's what I ended up doing. That was after the working line of credit that we had with our bank, and basically taking that. I didn't ever take that all the way to the 100% because the relationship with my commercial bank is a little bit more sensitive than the relationship on my home equity line of credit, which is tied to the equity in my home.
Sure.
And so I tapped in. It sounds a little counterintuitive, but I personally loaned DMC about $125,000 between the home equity line of credit, just taking it all the way to the max, and then personal credit cards that I'd had for years that I'd paid off and just never used.
Right. So, I think we talked about this when we were having the call before we jumped on the interview, maybe a week or so ago. Revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, and cash is king. For sure. And this idea, a line of credit isn't necessarily like your cash, but it's liquid working capital that's accessible quickly.
Yeah.
And the counterintuitive approach, though, of financing, and not to say anybody should be going out there right now and refinancing their house to build a equity line of credit, but the idea of having something there, and if you don't, then you might even want to consider that option, because who knows what might happen. Having access to cash is kicker, because even if you have the best company in the world, the best team and the best product, if you run out of cash, it's game over.
Exactly. I am so grateful. And really, it's not a bad idea to go out and refinance your home right now, because right now interest rates, at least in America, are really low. I actually just refied my home a week ago.
Oh, wow.
And then
Awesome.
went and renewed my home equity line of credit. And the thing is this is where I think that people get in trouble, is when they have credit, they feel like they have to use it. And I've always thought of credit as have credit and use it when you need to. And so it allowed me to pivot, because there were times where our business checking account got down to $25. I mean, it was nuts. It was bad. I was every time I'd go to the post office, I'd be saying prayers, please let there at least be one or two checks there. I'd thank the universe when my customers paid me. I still thank the universe when my customers pay me.
Me too.
But that's always a beautiful thing. But then there would payroll is due on Wednesday to the payroll company, and then they take the money out Thursday morning. So if by Wednesday night, when the banks close, I didn't have enough money to cover payroll, people weren't getting paid, and I vowed that would never happen, and it didn't. But there were Wednesdays at noon that I was like, okay, nothing came in the post office box today, so I'm gonna go take another $10,000 or $15,000 out of the home equity line of credit. And that went on for probably 8 months.
Wow.
And I mean, there were times where we have one business credit card that we use for gas and Home Depot and Lowe's, and not to name names, and then not, I'm not paid by any of those companies, but
sure.
They, it's what you do. And so I had, 10 guys using the credit card. And there were times where I was like, please don't put anything on the credit card except gas today. Or call me and I'll give
just
you
to make sure.
Yeah, I'll give you a different credit card number to use. Like, it was nuts. But, you know, we finally got stabilized.
So how did you do that?
Well, one, every single month I communicated with both of my bankers. So I'm a big believer in having at least 2 relationships with bankers and separating out your insurance. So the bankers are the key. And so every month on the first of the month, I sent an email updating my bankers as to where I was. And sometimes those emails were really pretty sad, but trying to find something positive to focus on, to say, okay, here is good that's happening. Like, don't lose faith in DMC. These are the things that we're doing to try to, you know, mitigate what's happening and keep afloat. And so that communication, I know that my bankers really appreciated it, because then they could take it back to their people. And I bank with kind of smaller local banks, and say, hey, you know what, DMC's, you know, they've hit a road bump, but, you know, this is how the owner's being proactive. So that's the first thing.
That's so huge, though. Communication's so key in crisis. You know, even if it's bad news, the fact that you're communicating, like the amount of people that don't do that, and then all of a sudden it's like, I can't do anything. And you're like, well, why weren't you talking to me about it? And there's no grace. I think that's huge for anybody. Yeah. And so can you just tell me quickly, though, about the philosophy around 2 banks and why you want to separate and having 2 different bank partners?
Well, because a long time ago, when we had as we were growing, we needed an extra line of credit. Like, we needed to grow. We had $50,000 and we really needed $100,000 line of credit. And the first bank, who I'd been banking with for 14 years, turned me down. And so I went to another bank, and it was at that point that I had this aha that, you know, from a banking perspective, having 2 awesome relationships makes you stronger as a company, because one of them is going to come through for you.
Yeah, okay.
And so I just think that, you know, we have our business checking with one bank, and then they actually have better rates on like van loans and things like that. And then I have my HELOC, my working line of credit, and we have a small business account there at the other bank. And we just go kind of between the 2. And then I have my personal, like, mortgage through a third party.
Cool. So you kind of keep them honest, right?
Well, and not only that, when I'm chief handshaker, I don't like to tell people no. And so I try to, like, I'm not like, you know, a mogul. I don't have millions of dollars to spend, but, you know, I know people like accounts. And so I think it's good business to kind of keep things separated.
That's cool. And then on the insurance side, you said the same thing. What was that about?
I keep my personal insurance through one company, and then my business line of credit or my business commercial package through one company, and then my health insurance through a third. So
and it's the same idea, like kind of spread the love, get everybody kind of working together?
Yeah, I just think, you know, there's always, and I'm sure if I was in debate, there'd be somebody standing next to me saying, you know, that having one really solid relationship helps with the synergy and things like that. But I think that putting all your eggs in one basket just isn't a really great choice.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, all the saying implies that, right? Don't put all your eggs in one basket. I just think it's a neat perspective too, because then you're also building this network of professionals that have a stake in your business, which is really cool in itself.
Yeah, and that's cool. Communicating with them. So the first thing was going back to the original question, communicating with my banker every single month without fail. Like, I set a reminder to do that. And even now, like, we're totally out of the woods and we're really stable and growing and doing great. But I send an email every quarter, because every month is probably a little bit much. When you're drowning.
Like, okay, Karen,
Yeah, every month they want to hear from you when you're drowning. But when you're stable, you know, once a quarter is enough for them to, like, feel that they know what's going on in my business.
Cool.
And then the second thing is just, I was shameless in how much I cut. I mean, the 2 things that really I didn't want to cut too far was our health insurance. But we found a great plan that the guys like, and our company pays 100% of our health insurance premiums for our employees.
That's awesome.
So I think my employees are really happy that they don't have to pay any premiums for health insurance. So the plans that we offer, let's face it, in America, there are no plans that are really great, but ours is not horrible. But everything else was, I mean, I was selling assets that weren't being used. I was, like I said, we switched phone carriers, everything. Like, and I mean, the great kind of positive outcome of that was that from 2018, where we had our worst year on record profit-wise, to 2019, we flowed profit 234%.
Huge. And so what was the turnaround then? Like, what did you do differently, or what did you continue doing? Like, what was that tipping point?
It really, what happened was we did get paid from the big jobs, even though we lost a ton of money, the cash flow helped.
Yep.
The cuts started to, like, some of the cuts like take time, like health insurance, you can only, that was at the end of the year. So we kind of had to like make it through then. And then we started to see that flow through. And, really we started to get momentum and focusing on what we do and what we do well, which was the service side of things, was critical.
So you kind of stick to your knitting type of thing.
Yeah.
So you mentioned this earlier, the difference between an installer and a service maintenance mindset. What did you witness there? And I think this is good for a lot of the audience to hear, because they might be installation and going into service. They might be in service going into installation. They're thinking about doing that right now. Like, what's that difference that you observed?
Well, the biggest difference is really good installers are almost like assembly line, right? They've got this, they're going to do it, they're going to put everything in place, on to the next one. I mean, they do it fast.
Yep.
Service guys, they're there to maintain and troubleshoot. And troubleshooting anything, computers, HVAC, plumbing, it takes time. You have to go through the steps.
You got to do the diagnosis, right?
It's more methodical.
Yeah.
So when you have methodical, very careful, thinking through things kind of technicians, and you push them and say, hey, you don't need to think, you just need to do. That's really tough to kind of change hats, right? And so that was the biggest lesson that we brought. I mean, that second job that we lost $100,000, I think we were like 1,800 man hours over. I mean, it looks phenomenal. Yeah. Like, we did good work.
It's the Sistine Chapel of installations.
It truly is. I mean, everything's level and it has extra hangers. And that's the thing with install, they're kind of there to just get it in. And I never really understood that. I was kind of like, oh, this is installed so crappy. It looks like garbage, when I'd go into other places. And then once I kind of understood, like, okay, the name of the game on install is how quickly can you do it and get on to the next thing.
Right.
And that doesn't work with service work. You've got to actually fix it.
That's cool. I love that. And then, so as you're coming out of it, you're like, hey, we made it. We learned our lessons, and now we're going to stick to our knitting.
We're going to stay in our lane.
Yeah. That's cool.
Yeah. And I would get really feisty with my team, and I'd be like, no construction, no tenant finish, no anything. And I've loosened up a little because now we've engaged with some partners to help us with that. And
cool.
We've partnered with a really great install company here in town, and they don't do service. So, they kind of look at us as the service guys as like, and I use guys because I'm from the upper Midwest. So for me, guys is everybody. Yeah. Like you guys. That's my Michigan roots coming through strong. Not meant to be anti-woman. But they don't understand how to fix things, and we don't really understand how to install them. So it's a good marriage.
Yeah, that's brilliant though. Well, the idea, so there's a couple things in there that I think are really interesting. One of them is just around this idea that, I mean, entrepreneurs typically say yes to way too much stuff. So, and it can be, it takes a lot of discipline to say no to stuff. So I think even just hearing your story about how saying no has helped propel you versus saying yes actually almost took you down is a great lesson for a lot of folks. But then if you want to say yes, find the partner that can do it well and then work together, because you can do a lot more when you're doing it together. I think that's just awesome.
Yeah. Well, and I think so that last job that I referred to, like, I got a PhD, so I don't regret it.
Right.
As difficult as it was, I don't regret it because I am a firm believer that the adverse things in our life are what make us stronger and smarter. And so I got really strong and really smart in a very condensed amount of time. And, I'm really grateful that, most of my team that was with me back then is still with me. I mean, the people who are meant to be, are. I'm really grateful that, my vendors were really gracious with me and our company. And that was the other
supportive
thing. Yeah. Like as much as I was communicating with my bank, I was communicating with the vendors just as much. I mean, there would be weeks where I was like, okay, I can pay one bill and this is the guy who gets the money. But they knew me. And that was the thing, is because we had a track record with them. This didn't happen the first year we were in business. It happened the 12th year we were in business. I think that helped because people, I can beg really well.
And they had a track record to trust, right?
Right.
That's cool. I mean, this is awesome. I think the idea of like managing through a crisis is a really important lesson that if you can learn before going into it, it would be great. And so I know you had to build some scar tissue, but even to what you said, that idea of like struggle builds resilience. And I think that's pretty amazing. A couple of the key takeaways that I loved from this one. One that we didn't get into too much, but this idea that oftentimes our biggest blessing is our biggest curse. And our biggest strength can be our biggest weakness. I think that's rings true for a lot of people, myself included. But the idea tactically of like having two banks and separating out insurance, separating out your financial resources, I think it's a simple thing. Everybody could do it. Get more people supporting your business. That idea of partnership, which rings true a little bit later on, I think is really cool. And then the idea of like, having access to cash is important no matter what the situation is. And if you refinance your house and if you want to have a line of credit, doesn't mean you have to use it, but now you've got a safety blanket of cash, because no matter how good you are, if you have no cash, you're done. And so that idea of survival mode, cash, communication, and cut, it's like the 3 C's of survival. Maybe that's part of the book topic that you end up writing, because that's really nice and simple. Like, make sure you've got cash, make sure you're communicating with everybody often, and make sure you're cutting everything. Because if the idea of, I'm going to cut this today so we can all have a job, versus maybe I'll let this go and then we'll just bleed out. I think that's really, really important. And then, saying no has a lot of power to keeping you focused and doing what you do well. Stick to your knitting. And if you want to say yes, find a good partner and do it together. Yeah,
for sure.
Thanks so much. This is awesome.
Thank you. It's been fun. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah.
So to just leave your listeners something, be like all those takeaways that you listed, but really as a business owner, like, have something else. Don't make it be your entire life, because even if that something else is just stepping away from your computer and your cell phone. One of the best things that I started doing probably 4 years ago is just going, like, I get an Airbnb for the weekend and just go away and just don't think about work. And then I do the same thing and only think about work. And, cool. You know, it helps with business planning, but it also helps to just get like away and not think about all the things, because, you know, I appreciate, like, DMC is kind of like a really great stepkid. I love it. I am invested in it. I am here for it. But because I didn't birth this baby, I think that there is an opportunity to be a little less emotionally invested in it. And I think for business owners who do birth their baby, like, learning to kind of develop that, okay, it's got to fly the coop, right? You've got to learn to, like, let it go a little. Otherwise you will hit the wall.
At 150 miles an hour.
At 150 miles an hour. And it's not
and that
pretty.
doesn't feel good.
No.
Thank you so much for doing this, Karen. Really appreciate having us on the show.
Thank you.